we ended up just kind of walking him through, this is what we think your house is worth in perfect shape. It's about $100,000. This is what we think it needs in work. And this is where we're at. So we hit him with our max was $45,000. Now, really, we could have gone up to about 55, but we wanted some cushion, some margin in this just because the area is really interesting.
Welcome to the Good Stewards Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to seasoned real estate investors who want to maximize the cash flow potential in their business. We are buy and hold investors with 1,000+ properties and markets across the U.S. who bring an insider's view into the nitty-gritty details of real estate investing. If you're looking to develop the mindset, teams, and systems that can dramatically build your real estate business and net worth, you're in the right place.
Welcome to this episode of the Good Stewards Podcast. I'm Ryan Dossie.
I'm Amanda Perkins.
I'm Bill Sirius.
And I'm Andrew Sirius.
Today, we are going to walk through the process of analyzing a deal from start to finish. I'm really excited to cover this topic because I kind of feel like kind of sourcing in this whole process of actually getting the deals is kind of like the gray matter of real estate investing almost. If you're choosing to go out and kind of pound the pavement yourself, we don't really have the luxury of like realtors bringing us listings or the auction going really well, or, things like Hubzu or online auctions. So that being said, our model really is about going out and finding the deals. But before we dive in, we do want to connect with you. So be sure to visit us over at thegoodstewards.com. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and make sure you also snag your free copy of our ebook, Don't Make a Profit, Create a Fortune. Bill and Andrew have put a ton of time into this thing. This isn't your typical ebook where you're going to get, 3 pages. It's something you'll want to sit down, take the time to go through. It really explains our model at a much deeper level. So diving right in, I just kind of want to give you a little bit of the backstory on this deal and kind of what the neighborhood looks like. So you can go out and kind of replicate this in your own market. Now, all of us on this podcast are buy and hold investors. However, when you're doing direct to seller marketing, occasionally you'll come up with a deal that you decide to sell instead. Or maybe it's not a good fit for your portfolio, or because we're all investors and all honest, maybe you had a deal that went over and you need to pull some cash from somewhere, right? So this particular deal is a property that we are wholetailing. So what that effectively means, we're buying it as is, doing very, very, very minimal work, turning around and listing it on the MLS at a premium in order to make a profit. I'm personally not a huge fan of flipping. We just had a deal close yesterday that our gross profit on it was $53,000. After inspections and concessions and commissions, we made $33,000. Now, I'm not going to complain. That's a great flip, but it's not exactly what we thought it was going to be. The perk with doing deals this way is it's kind of like what you agree to is what you get. They're buying it as is. You're not fixing anything. They're buying it understanding that it needs work. Not, one of the items that came up on the house we just sold was they didn't like that there was like a 1/4-inch gap above the electrical box, right? So you don't have to deal with that kind of stuff.
You really got 3 categories, right? You got wholesale, wholetailing, and then retailing to homeowners is what you're talking about. And homeowners are going to be the most picky, coming back with a laundry list of items. I've never seen it not happen, of things that need to be fixed. And then you have to go into a subsequent negotiation about which things you're going to fix and which things you're not going to fix. And that all takes time and money is what you're talking about. So.
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of the times, it's stuff that doesn't even really need to be done. You just have somebody who's, skittish, right? They're wanting new construction level of needs nothing on a house that's 40 years old. So
we recently had one where they wanted the chimney brick repointed, and it was in the inspection, and we knew they were never going to, it was $2,500, I think. We knew they were never going to do it. Never going to do. They were just pocketing the money essentially, but we were kind of forced into a corner. And if we're going to sell it to these people, we basically had to agree to it. Most unfortunate. And I just know that money just went out the door, and they just said, "Oh, thank you."
Yep. Yeah. We just had that with the roof on this project. So it's a metal roof, which I've kind of come to hate. It came on the building. We didn't put it on. They wanted something reflashed. And we learned, unlike with typical roofing, you actually have to remove the metal roof in order to fix that. So it was a substantial concession that we got to cut a check for.
Metal roofs are also loud during hailstorms or rain
or anything.
even.
But I mean, they are, somewhat indestructible if they're put on.
They last a while.
So this particular property is in a neighborhood that I would describe as like just on fire, right? New builds left and right, properties for sale left and right, stuff getting sold for really cheap and then getting, retailed and sold for like 200, right? So very, very volatile area. Kind of like in the path of progress was kind of this particular neighborhood. The school district is, not what I would describe as great because it is downtown Indianapolis. The neighborhood, I would describe it as like C-class, but climbing quickly. There's a couple HGTV shows that film in Indianapolis that are active in this area. So good area to be in. But the deal itself was actually really pretty interesting, kind of how it came to be. So one of the key takeaways for you on this is going to be diversifying your marketing. If all you're doing is direct mail, or all you're doing is pay-per-click, or all you're doing is cold calling, different people respond to different things has been one of the biggest lessons I've learned as a real estate investor. So this particular gentleman had been in my CRM getting mailed to consistently for 2 years, never called us. He came up on a small list we put together of duplexes that we were cold calling, looking for additional rentals. And the guy said, yeah, nope, no interest in selling that property. Now, second takeaway for you, instead of being like, oh, okay, have a nice day, our gentleman that was cold calling for us said, awesome, we'll get that one taken off the list. What else do you have that you want to sell? Notice it's not like, well, do you own any other properties? I mean, he like went for the kill. What else do you have that you're ready to sell? And the guy doesn't skip a beat and says, my personal house. Sweet. So all of a sudden we have what was effectively a take me off the list that we've now converted into a lead. Now, the other thing that made this deal pretty interesting, the guy was an attorney. Now, I don't know what it is with real estate investors. I think we're just like most people, we don't want to get sued, right? So most investors are like somehow afraid of like, oh, I can't make an attorney like an offer. Like it's going to be low. He's not going to like it. Like you're not in this business to make friends. You're in this business to get deals done. I can't count the number of deals we've bought from attorneys, but on the same hand, I also can't count the number of times I've heard an investor mention, I can't make an offer because they're an attorney or because they're a realtor or because they're, they have some sort of like a professional license. So this guy was an attorney. And then not only that, on top of that, mentioned somebody else was supposed to buy his house, didn't, and he was suing the guy, right? So we had to like, all right, we've got to make sure this is a good deal if we're going to get into the mess with this guy. So kind of just an interesting, very interesting neighborhood, very interesting guy, very interesting situation. The tricky thing with doing deals in a neighborhood like this is they're just really, really hard to value. There was a house a couple doors down that sold for $250,000. And there was a house a few doors down that sold for $30,000. So kind of how do you decide where you want to be? So we went through and looked for what we call like an as-is comp. Something you should always do when you're looking at making your offers is, did something else sell kind of in this condition recently? Because a lot of the times, first off, people are going to pay more money than you. So if you're wholesaling or wholetailing, that's a great guy to sell to if you can get a better deal than what he just got, right? Hey, I've got one 2 blocks away for less money if you want it. So we ended up finding quite a decent amount of as-is sales. We're always pretty conservative in kind of how we run our comps. We could have looked at it and been like, oh, this thing is worth $165,000. we decided really to just go off the average, taking the highs, taking the lows, ended up with an ARV right around 100 grand. Now, if I was going to keep this property as a buy and hold investor, I know long-term, it's going to be worth quite a bit more than 100 grand. But because we were looking at doing kind of a quick-ish exit, we had to look at what's the market doing today, not what do we suspect it to be doing, in the coming future. Andrew, you've got a pretty decent sized multifamily that I'd describe as kind of an area like this.
Which, are you talking about 4120? Well, I won't give the address, but yes, we have one kind of in between an area in Hyde Park and to the east of that. It's a tough spot to comp, mostly because it's literally right on the edge. So if you use the ones to the west of it, they're substantially nicer. You use the ones to the east of it, they're generally quite a bit worse. Now, but that area is also improving, and it's kind of moving further and further east, the strong areas. So, those ones. I always say, if you don't know, if you're caught, just be more conservative. Like if there aren't good comps in an area, that means you have to be less confident in your ARV. But yeah, there are some spots like that can be very tricky.
I think that's one reason. Like, if you're a new investor, stick to like the suburbs and the vinyl villages, right? Like, it's very much like, this is worth this. As you get more experienced at running comps and valuing properties, when you're looking at like downtown areas, it is very street by street. It is very block by block as far as what you're going to get and what you can get, which I'm sure Bill and Amanda have some stories of, appraisals coming in high and appraisals coming in low due to that fact.
So much of it is square footage with appraisers, but for us, it's really about neighborhoods. We just recently were comping a property that there was a property across identical square footage across the street for $240 and one next door for $244. But we had purchased one same size a number of streets over in a nicer area, but it was kind of the same thing. But we're feeling this property is going to go for $295, and it's all about the neighborhood, because this first neighborhood I described is kind of a little bit scary because there's some duplexes there right next to it that are places that are pretty shabby, where this other property is in a much better neighborhood. So it is all about the neighborhood, and it could be street by street, like you're saying, Ryan.
Well, and
I think that's a great thing to look at.
Even if you're taking into that consideration about the neighborhood, and maybe it isn't coming down to the appraisal, but if it is something that's dependent, like on a retail purchase or something that is going to come down to an appraisal, appraisers are making their own opinions. So it's hard to determine what they're going to come up with. And appraisers are going to be conservative. I've very, very infrequently we had an appraiser that's gone bananas over a property and come in just higher and really recognized the value of it. More often it's like they're kind of looking for ways to bring the price down. That's sort of how I always feel about it.
I've noticed on retail purchases, they tend to shoot for like right at what the purchase is. Like we've got one that house was worth $200 all day long. We ended up selling it for low 150s. And the guy's appraisal came in at like 153,500. And it's like, well, if you look at any comps, your appraisal should have come in significantly higher. Like this was a property was in decent shape. We sold it at a good deal. But I do think that's one of the reasons we are conservative is, if you look at, there was one comp of, 250 and everything else is in the low 200s, but man, this is a $250,000 deal because of this one outlier. You're going to get burned. Appraisers, like Amanda mentioned, aren't in the habit of, like, oh, we're just going to help these guys get an extra $10,000.
No.
Yeah. I rarely see appraisal come in high because appraisers are conservative by nature. They're working for banks, which are conservative by nature. And it's going to, you just figure it's going to be less rather than more almost all the time.
Yeah. And by
I've seen a few come in high.
Have you?
But yeah, I often see small multis come in high. But It definitely depends, but usually low is
You're
more
doing
common,
package deals a lot of times, Andrew, right? Where you're refinancing 15 properties at a time, and you get a pattern of some of them come in higher than you think, and some of them lower, and some of them about right. Is that?
Yeah, more or less. But I would say I probably am dealing with low appraisals that are unjustifiably low more often, but occasionally there are ones that I think are high. I usually just keep that to myself.
I typically see when you do a package, there's some that you disagree with the value on, and then there's some that you're like, I can't believe they assigned that number. And it, in my experience, it tends to balance out.
Mm-hmm.
This is unrelated to this, but we just had the most insane. Well, we've had problems with this specific appraiser, and we hope to never get him again. But it was a unique situation. It was a very large house attached to a duplex, 1 bedroom, 1 bath apartment, units up and down. And I think really it just boiled down to he did not have any idea what to come in at. And because it was a very unique property in an interesting area. And he asked me, like, I want to say 4 or 5 different times how much debt we had on the property. And I wouldn't answer his question because I knew what he was getting at. And then I finally gave it to him and asked why. And he said, basically what he was trying to figure out how much he thought we should be able to borrow against it in a backwards way, because really he couldn't find any comps. And I went actually and shared all of his communications with the bank and said, please don't ever let this man in our properties again. He doesn't know what he's doing.
What in the world does our debt or lack thereof have anything to do with the value of the property?
Well, because our original loan on the property was from approximately 1995, and it had been paid down for 20 years. It was like, don't worry about it.
Anytime a bank or anybody asks you, what do you owe on it? It's typically not good, right? It's not like, okay, we want to help you get more money. It's like, no, we want to just refinance that for you. All right. So moving on, kind of the other interesting thing with this deal was the guy's asking price. So he initially came in at $90,000. Now, kind of how I look at deals, we don't make the judgment call of whether or not we think this is a deal until we've built rapport, met the person, and walked the deal. Because if I was just looking at this based off of the area, based off the guy's asking price, I would have told him to get lost, right? You've got a house that needs $20,000 worth of work that really grossly smelled like human pee, like was kind of he was like, yeah, my toddler just likes to pee on his bed. And I was like, it seems like a problem you want to get fixed, but
pee, filth, this is smell of money.
Yeah, something. So long story short, when we removed the mattress from the house, it got way better. But so it's kind of like a gross situation. I will say, don't prejudge people. You think attorney or doctor or lawyer, and you assume oh, okay, this could be a nice property in good shape. That's not always the case. Some people with some of the sexiest job titles whose houses I've bought have had some of the nastiest houses, especially nicer properties in nicer areas. We've gone into and been there's literally animal poop in every single room of a $600,000 house that you just haven't cleaned up. Interesting decision. So, we didn't prejudge the lead. We went and met with the guy. And our goal was actually to try to lock it up on the spot on the initial appointment, because we really did like the area and we were able to do it. So kind of through talking to him, he mentioned, well, yeah, the other guys that I'm suing, they offered me $75,000 and didn't close. So we kind of used that against him of, well, if they couldn't pay $75,000, what makes you think I'm going to pay $90,000? Or even $75,000, right? And the guy was like, well, yeah, that's fair. And the people who tried to buy the deal from him are some people we ran into before, and I wouldn't advise how they do business. So we ended up just kind of walking him through, this is what we think your house is worth in perfect shape. It's about $100,000. This is what we think it needs in work. And this is where we're at. So we hit him with our max was $45,000. Now, really, we could have gone up to about 55, but we wanted some cushion, some margin in this, just because the area is really interesting. And within 10, 15 minutes of back and forth, We actually got him to sign the deal on the spot. We did have to wait 24 hours to get his wife's signature. But he was like, okay, cool. I'll just sue the other guys for $30,000 for the damages of them not closing. And we were like, no skin off my back.
So
cool.
Ryan, you always bring a contract with you, a real estate contract, I assume that.
Yeah. So our approach with this used to be, I'll call it a little softer. We'll follow up with you. We'll make you an offer within 24 hours. And what we do now is if we have the decision maker at the appointment, we try to lock it up. Now, our approach is still like very low pressure. We don't believe in operating a business dishonestly. So we don't do any of this like, I can only buy 2 houses this month. And, I've already bought one and I've got we don't like, nobody actually believes you if that's like the tactic you're using. Right. So we really don't do any of that. Our approach is more just, we typically kind of use their motivation. So this particular guy wanted to move out of the house before Christmas. So that was kind of our leverage of, look, if you want to get this closed prior to Christmas, we have to get stuff over to title like tonight. Right. So we'll typically use their time frame regardless of what they tell us. And, hey, sometimes title issues come up, sometimes judgments come up, sometimes they don't, and title work can be done in a matter of days. But I've also had, issues where it takes months. So that's kind of the leverage point that we use to try to get the deal done on that initial spot. I think one of the kind of takeaways with that is like, because we're not being manipulative, we don't have people calling us asking to get out of deals. When I first started and I didn't know any better, I just did what people recommended, right? Like, oh, you should tell them you can only buy one this month. And we would have situations where somebody would sell to us, we'd go back and like high five at the office. And then the next morning they're like, hey, my kids told me I shouldn't sell. Right. And, if you're a real estate investor, fastest way to get on the 5 o'clock news is threatening to sue Nana to get her out of her house so you can buy it as an investment deal. Right. So on that note, random tidbit, we'll only really threaten to enforce a contract if it's an absentee or a vacant property. If it's an owner occupant, as far as I'm concerned, if they change their mind, that's totally fine. One of the things we will do is we file, it's called an NOI, a notice of interest in our market, and that clouds title. So this protects us if they were to go and try to sell it to somebody else, right? Because sellers aren't always honest. We've had times where they've been like, oh yeah, my kid said not to sell it. And what really happened was the neighbor offered to pay them $10,000 more, and they're just not being forthcoming with you.
Ryan, do you have to have that recorded, by the way, that notice of intent?
Yes, it is a recorded, notarized document.
Huh.
It's different counties call it different things. In Indiana, it's called it's an NOI, and it basically records that you had like a contractual interest in the title. And what it does, if they go and try to sell around you, when the next title company is running title, it'll pop up that title's clouded. And we've even had a few deals that like a year later come back and somebody's like, hey, can you release this? And it's like, oh, I thought you didn't want to sell. Right. And we've gotten paid on several of those.
So this is just simply a document that's recorded rather than your entire contract that's recorded. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not like the actual contract, because that was the mistake we made early on when we went to our county. We had heard about this magical way of clouding title, and I looked like an idiot when I went down to the recorder's office with a purchase and sale agreement I was trying to record. It's a separate document. So this is one of those like consult your advisors, figure out how to do it in your market. I will say with these, don't be a terrible human being. If you go under contract on a deal and you don't close, you'd better make sure you unrecord that document. It's a great way for you to get sued if you default on somebody's property and then they try to sell it to somebody else and can't because you have that on there.
It's easy to cloud a title. You can virtually do it for any reason, but be careful because you can be sued for incorrectly or fraudulently clouding the title. So you got to be consult an attorney before you cloud a title if you have a question about it.
Yeah, I mean ours are all done by our title company's attorney. So, just kind of one of those other tidbits. So on this particular deal, we bought it for $45,000. We closed on it, and we've gone ahead and shot it out. We haven't even listed it yet at $70,000, and people have been beating down our door to see it. Right. So it's going to end up being a pretty solid deal when it does close. But the kind of the thing with these deals in particular is like you want to be in and out of these really, really quick. This is all about wholetailing, in my opinion. It's about lowering your risk over something like a flip. You do a flip, you're sitting on it for months. This deal we had closed yesterday, they threatened not to close like 4 times over like just dumb inspection stuff. My favorite was when the water wasn't on for the inspection, and like it was off in the house, and the inspector didn't know how to turn it on. So it was like we're in all these little tidbits. On something like a wholetail, your goal is to be in and out really, really quick. So it's not I would say the strategy with this isn't like, I'm going to list at 100,000 and let it sit and just slowly drop and see what the most I can get is. The goal with these is I want this thing to move fast. So we're pricing it where it's still a great deal for an investor. In fact, as you get kind of like a buyer's list of people built up that are looking for deals from you in your market, if you shoot it out to your list and get nothing, chances are you didn't negotiate a good enough deal or you priced it wrong. Only other real takeaway I've got on this deal and on how we run comps, by being conservative in my purchase, I can get a little bit more aggressive in my resale. So what I mean by that is how I interpreted comps was $100,000. How other people have interpreted comps is 125 or 150. So by being conservative, I'm not having to sell them on the fact that maybe you can get more. I'm not even bringing it up. They're looking at it and kind of dollar signs are running of, well, I think I can actually get 125 or a house the same size. Now, granted, it was like a beautiful custom, 6-figure remodel, went for $250,000. These guys only want 75. Makes it very, very easy to sell. Same thing with the appraisers. If we're super conservative, they can come in and maybe they're not as conservative as we are. The first deal Bill and I ever did, we thought the appraisal would come in at 160, came in at 165, which I actually thought was a little bit low. But comps today, cookie cutter, vinyl village in that neighborhood are 185 all day long. We're only into it for 120. I'll do that deal all day long. And the reason we got that benefit is we didn't assume, well, maybe this is worth 175. Or at the time, I think there was 180. We didn't look at it and like, wow, we think this is that house. We shot low and got rewarded for it. What takeaways do you guys have for folks listening to this?
Be conservative. I guess what would one quick thing, the way to end it is just through your own mindset. What makes you think a property is best to wholetail, and flip? Like, where would you draw the line? I mean, I know you don't do a ton of flipping, but what would you look for as the key things in that respect?
So I take like a couple tea leaves, a chicken bone. No. So, it really is like what are the needs of the business at this moment? Right.
And even if you have, do you have a construction crew ready to go, or are you starting from scratch to do a retail? It's,
what does the workload look like? What do our cash reserves look like? How many vacants do we have that we're currently filling? Do they have the bandwidth for it? Right. It's, I would like to say that there's like a clean cut, way, but for any like NCIS fans, it's a lot more of like a Gibbs, like a gut thing of like, what do I think is the wisest decision with this property? Now, I'll be totally honest. I'm kind of with Bill in that I want to keep everything. Like me making $20,000 on a deal is cool, but I know if I'm able to hold on to that thing and get it to cash flow long-term, I make way more money. But especially when you're doing direct to seller marketing, you're going to have stuff come up that doesn't fit or you don't like it.
It's too far
But you
away.
want to
It's not a
monetize your
neighborhood.
advertising somehow. So you be creative with
Correct.
how you're going to get out of it.
You're paying for, you're paying for advertising, you're paying for staff, you're paying for, so my big decision on this one, to be totally just 100% transparent, we want to kick the new year off with like a blast. So instead of us like, we'll just do kind of the marketing we can afford, or we'll do 5,000 or 10,000 pieces of mail. It's like, let's drop 20,000 and kick the new year off right. And, as you get going in this, it's very easy to make all this pay for itself. Initially, you're going to have to fund your marketing, but once you kind of understand wholesaling and flipping and buy and hold, you shouldn't ever really be in a position where like you're going into debt to find deals. Now, in the beginning, that's what I did. I wouldn't recommend necessarily taking the path I took to get here. But I mean, for us, it is let's let this thing pay for itself. And when we look at it, our typical profit on a deal that we choose not to keep right now is about $16,000. So typically for me, I need to do about 2,000 pieces of mail to get another off-market deal. So if I go and drop 20,000 pieces of mail, in reality, that's 10 deals. If my metric holds what it's been for a long time of $16K a deal, that's $160,000 in revenue, assuming we don't keep anything, which we will. So that's kind of our thought process. We look at like a function equation. Put X in, Y comes out the other side. So put this deal in, get 10 more out the other side was the decision.
I also think that you need to decide which deal you're going to do. And sometimes it's unfortunate when you slip from doing a wholesale to doing a flip or vice versa. Because if you're going to do a retail flip property, then you're probably going to put products into it, maybe quartz, granite, who knows what, on an upper end. And then you don't want to turn around and rent that property. So I think you've got to, at some point, just force yourself, I'm going to make a decision and stay with it. This is the path I've chosen of the disposition of this property.
I'm going to devil's advocate that same point. On the flip side, this house we just sold yesterday, the reason we got clobbered on our inspection response was because we did a rent-ready rehab and then flipped the house. So stuff that didn't matter to us, like, there's a little bit of a gap between the electrical box, or one of the other things that came up was the metal roof that we had to write a large concession check for. The issue was this flashing. Property hadn't leaked in like a decade. Weren't worried about it at all. But we had these things that we hadn't anticipated doing that we had to do. Now, I'm not going to pretend to cry over spilt milk. We still made like $33,000, but it was less than what we anticipated, which had we not had all these things come up, we would have made over 50. So kind of on that note, we'll move here to a close. I want to thank you guys for kind of tuning into this episode. Obviously, you like what you heard because we're incredible. Remember to subscribe to our podcast at thegoodstewards.com. When we allow you guys or ask you guys to connect with us, we really do mean it. We chat about those. Like that's not like ask us questions. That's how we determine where some of these episodes are going. We even shout some of you guys out in these directly. So be sure to do that. We'll talk to y'all next time.